The movie begins with our protagonist, Run, being taken to prison. Upon arrival, the guards order him to remove all his clothing. Completely naked, Run watches as they strip him of his possessions, and then they perform a cavity search on him. One of the officers is curious why he was assigned to that particular prison, as the other inmates are twice his size and are in maximum security. However, the young man remains silent and only wants to be taken to his cell. Once there, Run discovers that the prison is divided by floors, classified according to the cruelty of the inmates, and he is assigned to the very bottom level, where the worst are held. Barely a few minutes after arriving, the other inmates try to take advantage of him. Noel, one of the older prisoners, enters his cell and steals his mattress, claiming that Run gave it to him. Since Run doesn't have the courage to fight, he must sleep on a wooden board as a bed. That same afternoon in the yard, Run is attacked by another prisoner. Here we learn the reason he's in prison. It turns out that Run stabbed a friend of this inmate, and now the inmate has come for revenge. However, he's willing to forget what Run did if he agrees to do a little job for them. Plus, Run could earn a place in the gang, which would help him survive in there. A few days later, one of the gang leaders approaches him to assign the task he must carry out. He has to attack an Albanian and make sure to break all his teeth. It's a message the gang sends to snitches. The next morning, Mason, the second in command, comes looking for Run to do the job. After stealing a billiard ball from the game room, he heads out to the yard to find the Albanian, but the Albanian hasn't come out. In fact, he stayed in the hallway. This forces Run to act on his own and wait for an opportunity to surprise him on the stairs. Run attacks him from behind, puts a pillowcase over his head, and repeatedly strikes him with the billiard ball until the Albanian is unconscious. Then he takes advantage of the situation by placing the man's jaw on the edge of the steps and striking again until he breaks all his teeth. Since he didn't use his fists, Run manages to pass the inspection conducted by the guards to find the culprit, and he remains steadfast during the interrogation. However, because it's likely he committed the attack considering his status as a newcomer, the guards lock him up in a solitary confinement for a few days to see if he'll break and confess what he knows. When he's finally let out, he stays silent, which pleases Mason. Nevertheless, he must start from the bottom, basically as a slave, cleaning the bathrooms and putting up with the mistreatment from the other members. For weeks, Run performs all these tasks. However, fearing a possible attack, he steals a spoon from the dining hall and begins sharpening it using a rock at night when the guards are less active. The next day, they assign him to kitchen duty, where he meets Rashid, a young man who randomly starts talking to him and asking about his life. He even asks if Run already has a partner in prison. At that moment, Mason appears and chases Rashid away, then orders Run to return to his cell and lock himself in for half an hour after his shift ends. It doesn't matter what he hears, he must not come out. The protagonist obeys, and while in his cell, he hears someone in the next room screaming as they're beaten. A few minutes later, he's summoned to clean that same room. When he finishes, they order him to distract the guards while Mason completes a task given by the gang leader. Suddenly, an alarm sounds. It turns out a prisoner has been attacked, suffering a deep wound in the neck that needs urgent medical attention, or he'll bleed out. Since Run is the cleaning guy, he has to mop up all the blood, and while doing so in the bathroom, he discovers a kind of secret compartment behind the toilet but can't open it. He then goes to Rashid, tells him what he found, and asks him to see if there's anything behind the toilet. Maybe they're hiding drugs or money. That afternoon, Run's grandmother comes to visit him and brings him some chocolates he used to love as a child. When he returns from his visit, Rashid is waiting to tell him it's not actually a hidden compartment. It turns out someone opened a hole in the pipe, and it connects the bathroom in the cell blocks to the one in the kitchen. Anything they flush down the toilet upstairs can be received on the lower floors, giving them the freedom to bypass the guard searches. Armed with this new advantage, Run goes to the gang leader and offers to handle the drug trade. He only wants a share of the profits and to stop being everyone's slave. The protagonist gets his chance, and after receiving the product in the grossest way possible, he packages the drugs in the small wrappers from the chocolates his grandmother gave him. The method works. Run flushes the drugs down the toilet, and Rashid, 3 floors below, puts his hand into the hole and catches the contraband. Not long after, the gang leader rewards him with a new cell that has a better view. Now, no one mistreats him anymore, although he still has to work as the cleaning guy to keep up appearances and maintain his operation. He's even invited to poker games, where he meets other high-level members and can socialize with them, so his life in prison starts looking up. The money keeps flowing, and Run shares his portion with Rashid, which leads them to become good friends and spend more time together during kitchen duty. A few days later, a leader from another gang approaches him and says he already knows about the operation. It turns out Rashid let the secret slip, and now Run has to deal with a new, quite violent client. This new client is Bashir, and not only does he want the same price, he wants 3 times the usual amount. That makes delivery difficult, as no one is sure Rashid can handle that quantity. He might have to insert 3 capsules into his rectum. The leader agrees to give him the drugs, but it's almost impossible for anyone to smuggle so much product inside a single body, and Run shoulders all the risk if things go wrong. That night, Run sends the drugs through the toilet, and Rashid takes care of the rest, delivering them to his cell block where Bashir is waiting. The next morning, Rashid appears pleased to have pulled off the delivery, but there's a catch. Bashir didn't pay him. Instead, he claimed he already spoke to Run about a payment plan, which enrages the protagonist, who risked his life on that deal. With no options and a huge debt to cover, Run calls his grandmother to ask for help, but she's an elderly woman with no savings, so he has to solve this on his own. That night, Mason visits him to clarify the seriousness of his situation. On the gang leader's orders, Mason must beat Run every day until he settles his debt. After a week, they'll kill him. Desperate, the next morning, Run confronts Bashir. Bashir is older and stronger, so he beats Run up, and the guards throw Run into solitary confinement. He spends the next several hours tied to a stretcher until he calms down, and then they move him to an isolated cell for a few days. When he finally gets out, he fears the worst and carries the sharpened spoon everywhere, hoping to defend himself if attacked. Although he spends the next days on high alert, watching the halls and keeping an eye on himself in the showers, it's actually Rashid who sets the trap. Rashid asks him to talk in private and leads him to the refrigerated storage room. Run trusts his friend, thinking he may have come up with a plan to recover the money. However, everything changes when Rashid betrays him, locking him in the cold room where the gang leader's men were waiting. A short time later, we see Mason coming out of the cold room with another man. Both are very dirty and stained with blood. After telling Rashid he did well, they leave. Then Rashid goes in alone, only to find his friend lying in a pool of blood. He tries to wake him up, but it's too late. Run is dead. A few minutes later, while Rashid continues his duties, one of his co-workers enters the cold room and discovers Run's body. The guards then interrogate Rashid, but he says nothing. He knows that if he names Mason, he'll be dead before they can transfer him to another unit. That same night, Mason meets with Rashid to threaten him with throwing hot oil on him while he sleeps if he ever talks about what he witnessed. But the young man already understands how things work and plans to keep quiet. Back in his cell block, Bashir congratulates him for his performance and for staying strong in front of everyone. As a reward, Rashid will receive better treatment and gain the respect of his peers. Now that Run is gone, Rashid reveals the pipe trick and keeps doing business with them. However, Bashir's orders get bigger and bigger, and Rashid has to come up with new ways to transport the drugs inside his body. The next day, he gets a visit from his mother and brother. She's suffering a lot, having her eldest son locked up, and talks to him about how important it is to do the right thing and pray constantly for forgiveness in their Muslim faith. Rashid, who's having a hard time because of everything he's gone through, breaks down and cries in front of his mother, telling her that guilt is consuming him and he's afraid of being condemned for his actions. That night, Rashid decides to do the right thing. When all the other inmates are asleep, he calls the head guard and begs to go to the mosque to pray. Once they're alone, he shows the guard the drugs, explaining that he knows how they circulate in the prison, and he's willing to show him the entire process and identify those responsible. After seeing this, the head guard tells him to forget about their conversation and returns the drugs to their owner, then reminds Rashid he only has 3 months left before release and won't allow a good kid like him to end up dead before getting a second chance. Touched by the guard's kindness, Rashid decides to reveal how Run died and who was responsible. He is permitted to pray before returning to his cell, but the head guard has to decide what to do with the new information Rashid has provided. The next morning, Bashir comes looking for his drugs. After Rashid hands them over, the rest of the gang's members attack him with rocks inside socks. Then they pour boiling oil on him. The guards arrive, but it's already too late. The damage is done. The movie ends with a shot of the prison, and Rashid's screams can be heard in the background, reminding us of the daily cruelty that exists in prisons around the world.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.